Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. This is my podcast. Welcome to it. I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you are doing as good as you can be and providing yourself the necessary levity in order to march forward in a weird and confusing, upsetting time in American history. I hope by the time that by the time you hear this, that I'll have the news that my arm is no longer in separate pieces. So hopefully there's some good news regarding that. But in the meantime, I have an episode a long time coming, and I'm very excited to finally get to share this with you guys. My guest on the show today is comedian and Emmy-winning writer Josh Gondelman. Josh, I met doing stand-up in New York City. You might know him as the head writer on Desus and Mero on Showtime. He was also a writer on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. All around one of my favorite comics in New York City. Incredibly friendly guy. And you might also, and I hope if you're listening to this, if you haven't already, you'll know him from his first comedy special, People Pleaser, which is now available on all of your video on demand platforms. I'll have a link to it in the description so you can get your specific links so you can check it out. Josh has released several comedy albums, which are also available as well, but this is his first special, and we talk a little bit about that in the episode as well. But this is really, I think, a perfect encapsulation of everything I love about Josh Gondelman's stand-up. It is incredibly well-written jokes, delightfully silly, and you can friendly. Like there is a gleeful silliness to Josh's stand-up that I really enjoy, and I've also loved his writing work as well and the shows that he's written on. So I have been wanting to have him on the show for a long time, and we finally got to sit down and make it happen. So I am so excited to get to share this with you guys. Again, before we get into the episode, I want to let you know Josh's new special, People Pleaser, is available now. You can get it wherever you get your comedy albums and wherever you stream. It is available as well, and I have a link in the description that will take you to all the different places you can get it. But it is available on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Google Play, Vimeo, YouTube, Microsoft Xbox, all the different platforms that you can stream Josh Gondelman's new special, People Pleaser. And I'm incredibly excited to get to share this conversation with you, with a great guy and a very funny comic. Let's talk to the eternally delightful Josh Gondelman. Awesome. Thanks again, man. It started raining because I had a plan before we got on that I would go to Dunkin' and get a giant iced coffee to be on brand for talking to Josh. I don't know if you've ever been asked this. Where do you stand on iced coffee versus cold brew?
So I don't mind a cold brew. I like a nice kind of like rich flavored cold brew, but one thing I like about iced coffee, it's a little less strong, right? So I like getting a Dunkin' iced coffee that's like as big as like like an ox's thigh.
Yes.
And then just drinking that for like an hour or two. And so it's a volume game for me in part, and I'm not like as attuned to like I doctor it to taste the way I want with a little milk or whatever, but I'm not as like, my palate is not super refined as much as I want like an intravenous caffeine drip for several hours.
Sure. You're not necessarily taking like an airy slurp and going, notes of citrus and oak.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's like growing up on Dunkin' in terms of like, you know, not like, I didn't like breastfeed Dunkin' iced coffee, but
Right.
like from when I started drinking coffee, I'm kind of accustomed to that as like the baseline coffee.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I've always preferred, when it comes to like the chain coffees,
Yeah.
I've always thought, even like with hot coffee, I've always thought Dunkin' tasted better. And I worked at Starbucks, so I'm familiar with like the process a little bit, and I've always found it a little bit too like dark for my taste.
Yeah.
But then like conversely, Like I really like. I don't know if you get a ton of YouTube ads for Bones Coffee right now, but I really
No,
like.
I haven't seen them.
Oh, they're. I really. If you are into flavored coffees at all, I really like
Sure.
that. I really like them. It's like flavored coffee that doesn't taste like super, artificial. I guess.
Oh, that's cool. I'll check that out. We also do occasionally a shout. I'll give them a shout out because we've been, uh, in the home even in the home. I sound like a magazine spread or something like in the
Right.
home. But at home we have been doing the Grady's cold brew concentrate. We started kind of early pandemic,
hmm
because we were like just like not going out as much.
Yeah.
It just didn't seem like going into a coffee shop every day in mid 2020 was like the move. So we would get the kind of brick that you would get for like an office refrigerator, and my
Yeah.
wife and I just kind of like guzzle that slowly throughout a week or two.
Yeah. That was the move. We at the beginning of the pandemic, my wife and I, there was one coffee shop that was still open, and I think for my wife to maintain her sanity, would walk and get like the big what are those things? Growler
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of cold brew, and then just
Yep.
cut that with a bunch of half and half.
Yep. Yeah,
That's
I mean, it's nice to like, I mean, part of that, like people say like coffee is about the ritual for so many people, right? But I do
hmm
think it is nice, like, to pop outside and get a little air, especially on days where I'm just writing at home.
hmm
It's, oh, here's a 5-10 minute errand I can do that gets me a little fresh air and stops me from looking at a computer screen.
Yeah, that's something I've realized as well in the pandemic, because for the longest time, like my dream, I think, was the dream of like, if I become a successful stand-up comedian, I won't have to have a day job or go to an
Hmm.
office anymore.
Hmm.
But then I've realized some natural tendencies about myself is that if I don't have somewhere to go, I'm not choosing to go a lot of places.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
for like my to not end up like one of those like 800-pound people where they have to like cut the side of the your house out to get you out of your bed. I've had to like start making a conscious effort to like, okay, you're gonna go walk around this park. It'll at least once a day.
Yeah.
It's like it's like not like making conscious decisions to be a better person. Whereas I think for the longest time I thought I had to kind of be like when I was just in New York for a while. I don't know if you felt this way. Like when you started doing comedy, I felt like had to kind of sort of live like as sort of a vagabond, like ne'er do well, kind of like slightly on the edges of society.
Sure.
If that makes any
I know
sense.
that feeling. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yes, yeah, you mean like early pandemic where you just had, or is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about
Or,
that, and then I'm also talking about when I first moved to New York. I was like living on the edge of like being able to afford food and
oh,
rent and
sure.
stuff.
Yeah, I feel like there was not a lot of, when I was here, my first couple years, I had a little savings, and I had a few jobs that I was using to kind of like put band-aids over the bank account.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was a lot of like, a lot of like spaghetti, one
Yep.
box of spaghetti for like 4 straight meals and stuff. And it was a lot of like, um of like, oh, do I use a subway swipe, or do I walk across the entire city and save a swipe for the way back? And I was never like, I don't want to like paint a picture of like, I was not on the verge of like total financial ruin, but certainly it was, excuse me, it was a point where it was like, if we got, like a bodega sandwich was like, ooh, okay, we're
Oh,
doing it today.
oh yeah, exactly. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna stop by the Chinese place on my way
Yes,
home. I was like,
exactly. And not just like make a big pot of something that lasts for the few days.
oh, totally. I watched the new special, and
Oh, thank you.
it's fantastic. Like it is. The jokes are so good. Like this is what I've always liked about your comedy is just how fucking good the jokes are. Where you just
Thank you.
the same way I react to like a really great song or a chorus in a song. I'm like, oh, that is really great. Like,
Oh man, that means so much.
of course,
I appreciate it.
absolutely, man, and I'm especially happy that the "Caress Me Down" bit got
Hmm.
expanded because I remember hearing you and Pete Holmes talk about that and thinking,
Yes.
oh yeah, because how many songs do you listen to and not really think about the lyrics? But then you listen to them, you're like, oh, this is like a crime, these lyrics. This is what he's talking about.
It's really bizarre, and those lyrics it's like pretty grimy, and it's like almost you're like this is on the radio still, and I yes, so that was the first time. So the summary of this is there's a long bit on the special about my wife, now wife, then girlfriend,
Uh-huh.
singing along with the song Caress Me Down on the radio, basically, when we were in a car. It was a really hard day, and she just like did this really funny thing about it. It's like truly she was so funny, and I'm just relating how funny she is. And
Yeah.
the first time I ever told that publicly was when I did Pete Holmes's podcast, because what's the hardest, one of the questions he asked is, what's the hardest you've ever laughed? And it was like
Yeah.
1 a.m. on the night of my grandmother's funeral had been that day,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just like loopy and delirious, and my wife did this like silly bit about the song, just singing it really loud at me, and it's like maybe still hardest I've ever laughed in my life. And
Yeah.
it so I told that, and it like the rhythm of it, just like telling it to Pete, I was like, maybe I should tell this other places. And so it became a stand-up bit.
That's super cool. I thought that riff was so good, especially like when he started playing it.
Oh yeah.
I love when a bit like an organic conversation produces like a great bit. Um, I don't think we've talked since you got married. Congrats on the
Thank
marriage. I
you.
know it's probably been a couple years now. When did you get married?
We got married in 2017.
Oh, so it's been a few years now.
5 years. Yeah, 5 years this Memorial Day weekend.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's the best.
Congratulations.
Thank you. When
Yes.
did you get married?
I got married in September of 2020. So
God,
it was.
congratulations. We definitely haven't talked about that.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Very kind of a different wedding than we had originally planned.
Sure, I can imagine.
But it was pretty for what it ended up being. It was pretty great. I think my wife is still sort of mourns for the plans she made that didn't get
Sure,
to
I understand
to
that.
happen. But I guess I'm just more of the person like, hey, we're married now, and isn't that great? Like,
Of course.
yeah. So
I do feel like, though, I'm a person. I know a wedding can mean so much, like the kind of image of a wedding can mean so much to people. And
Yeah.
even in addition to that, I'm just a person, I think I get fixated on just like, ooh, wouldn't this be nice? Like, wouldn't it be nice to go to this restaurant on my birthday? And then I find out like my birthday's on a Monday and they're closed on Mondays. And I'm just like, oh, geez, how am I going to bounce back from this? So I understand like the kind of destabilizing feeling of having like something you're excited for pulled out from under you, even on a small scale.
yeah, that's why like anytime something cool might happen, I don't say anything about it until after it actually happens. Like if I have like someone who is said they'll do the show, I don't want to talk about it until it actually
Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but
Well, that's such a comedy entertainment thing, I think, too, right?
Yeah,
Where,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
there's so much. Like, I think what people who are close to comedians, but like aren't like super familiar with like the rhythm of like what a career is like, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It's tough to know, to calibrate for like, oh, I auditioned for this thing, and like 2 months later they'll be like, ooh, what happened from that audition? You're like, nothing. That's what happens with almost every audition. Or like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm working on this script. It's like, what happened? Well, I finished it. Like, you know what I mean? There's so much that is not, that doesn't bear the kind of like visible fruit that you might expect, unless you're really familiar with like, oh, there's so much like backstory and required work before the stuff that is visible, and even during, while stuff is visible, is seen by other people, if that makes sense. I rambled through it, but
No,
I
that
think
makes
I
total
got there.
sense. Because this thing is not like a traditional career path where it's not
Right.
like you submit a resume and
Yeah.
then maybe you're qualified and you get an interview. It's you work on a bunch of stuff,
Yes.
and hopefully, luck is just. One of my favorite sayings about luck is that it's preparation meets opportunity. So you can control
Sure.
all the preparation,
Yes.
but then the opportunity has to present itself, and sometimes it does, sometimes it comes in a different way, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes, I mean it's truly stuff where you will turn in, you'll audition for something as like the easiest. That's the one that's like the most you're like, okay, I did this audition, and even if you do a great job, other people also are doing a great job.
Yeah.
And it might just be like, oh, the other lead is like this height and we wanted someone that's this height for contrast. So like if the lead
Right.
was 6 inches shorter, you would be exactly who we needed, but the lead is 6 inches taller, and so we need someone who it just looks different on screen than you do. And it's like, okay, I guess there's nothing I could do but try and be like, I was not the right person for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Just do as much as possible, and then a couple things stick. I wanted to ask you about the process of like creating a special, because this is your first like video special, and then I know
Yeah.
you've got audio albums as
Hmm.
well. So when you're working on an album or a special, are you starting completely from scratch and working on writing and touring jokes specifically for that special, or do you start with what you already have and then just try to and then like work on arranging it into a special?
So this is a great question, and it's a little different from project to project. For me, it has been
Mm-hmm.
this special. I can talk about this. Oh, let me talk generally about the albums. In the past,
Sure.
because I'm not a full time comic, and so it takes me a little longer to develop the hour that I want to record, even audio,
Yeah.
and I don't tour that heavily throughout the year. I usually can kind of squeeze in, like, I'll do a couple of headline dates here and there peppered in, and then when I have a long break from writers' rooms, excuse me, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, if that happens, then
Mm-hmm.
I will cram in a bunch of road dates and try to like work this new hour into shape. So the way I usually write an hour is like I start from the old one, and
Mm-hmm.
then hopefully I've in and around the city written like a big chunk of the new stuff, and then as the new stuff replaces the old stuff, it's the
Mm-hmm.
way like all our cells are constantly regenerating.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like that. It's like that. It's like my act is like my human body, in that after a couple years it'll be totally different, but it doesn't happen all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but with this special, because I was kind of halfway, a little more than halfway, it turned out, to having a new hour.
Yeah.
um when I got this opportunity to record this video hour, I used it as a chance to showcase the new material, but also to draw in some of my favorite stuff over the last several years that I'd already recorded on albums but hadn't done on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I just figured like this is a way to introduce, because I don't have this new 60 minutes that's like, oh, this is the new tight hour. This is exactly what I want to talk about right now.
Yeah.
I used it more as a chance to like do half that and half of like, here's an overall primer of like who I am and what my comedy is like. And that was partly just because I was like, I think for my first special, I don't want to feel like I'm scraping together the last 20 minutes over
Sure.
the course of a month, and kind of like, papering over the cracks. I was like, I want this to really kick ass, and I want people to see it, to really enjoy it and see like stuff that I'm really proud of. And I figured that even if there are people who are familiar with my stand up, there's enough new stuff that the couple old things that they'll be seeing will be like, ooh, I remember this one. I'm glad to
Uh-huh.
hear it. And not like, oh, I can't believe it. Especially because it's my first video special. So I felt like rather than beat myself up for it, or like anticipate the few comments of like, ugh, heard this one before,
Mm-hmm.
I would, give myself the permission to do the best version of what I could muster at the time, and and that included like kind of this pastiche of material through over a few years, which I'm like, I really am happy with how it all hangs together. I'm really psyched about that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was a different process than I've ever undertaken before. And then this new stuff that I'm working on
Mm-hmm.
since the album, because I recorded over a year ago now, about 53, 54 weeks ago. And so I now have another 25 minutes or so that I've written since then that I'm like, oh, I want to like kind of take the time, shape this into a specific form, and then put it out, rather than just like, okay, I've got an hour and I might as well record it, because more than an hour isn't super useful to have at my fingertips,
Right.
like because then you start losing stuff, because those cells replace again, and now
Sure.
I'm like,
Sure.
sure, I've written 80 new minutes, but 20 of them don't fit into the set the way I'm not touring theaters where I can go, all right, I'm gonna do an 80-minute show for people. I think if I go over an hour at a club, people are like, all right, need to be a hero. So which I don't feel the need to be a hero.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like a different vibe in the like the comedy club room, but I think that's a very healthy approach to that, especially because if this is this is sort of going to be a lot of people's introduction to
Yeah.
you, seeing you for the first time on video, because
Yes.
and I might be completely wrong, but I have a feeling that video specials get a lot more airtime and views than just audio, just in the grand scheme of
I think that's what it
percentages.
feels like. I mean, it really feels like people in my life, people who are not, you know, close to me, both, people that are close to me, people that aren't close to me. I feel like there are many people that are engaging with my stand up for the first time
Hmm.
in this way. Like people who I've known for years who have never seen me live, fans whose towns I've never made it to because I'm only really, out 8 to 10 weeks a year and I just can't
Yeah.
get every place. And so it's been really it's been really cool to see the response and like with people just being like, "Oh, I watched this and it's really great." Where I think with an album, it's a little more passive, right? It's like people find
Right.
it on Pandora, people find it on Spotify. You kind of accrue listenership that way, or XM Radio is a
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
one. But it's with this, it's like people going like, "Ooh, this is my evening. I'm gonna sit in front of the TV and
Hmm.
use my smart TV to watch it on VOD, and that's what we're doing tonight instead of like 2 episodes of what we do in the shadows or whatever, whatever
Yeah.
light
Yeah.
entertainment that they were going to, what they would enjoy on a different night. They're like, well, tonight it's this.
Oh yeah. No. Absolutely. It's more of a. It requires more participation for sure,
Hmm.
and I
And more
like.
and more planning, right? You can listen to an album, you can like have it on in your car, you can hear it passively and just be like, oh yeah, I listen to that. But with this special, I think you can. It asks people. It doesn't require, but it asks people to focus in a different way.
Oh, 100%. And I think your approach is really great because this hour is like a really like solid like hour that I genuinely think is going to like stand up like several years from now.
Oh,
And
thank
I
you.
mean that
That
in
really means a lot.
oh, absolutely
Because
cuz
I.
oh,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. What I was thinking is like I love I love a comedy special that is effectively timeless,
Yeah.
because something that you can go back to and it's not era dependent, which for your stand up I think leads to more longevity because you'll put out other hours and then people come back listen to that and then find this one and be able to kind of track the growth of Josh Gondelman as like a
Yeah.
person and as a performer. I also imagine because in if you're like working in writers' rooms, and I know I want to talk about some of the shows you work on in a bit.
Yeah.
You're dealing mostly in like current events and topical stuff,
Hmm.
very like of the moment kind of things, which
Hmm.
do not lend themselves very well to a special. Like I always wonder about like these like there's comics like that are well known in like New York and Los Angeles that like go like 5 to 6 years without doing a special, and I just think, and I wonder why most of the time, but
Sure.
then I'm just like, oh well, this person is like their act is like 30 like 25 minutes of what's in the news that day,
Yep.
so maybe it takes, and that's not gonna play like a year from now, especially in the like era of information we live in right now. So
Hmm.
that's like difficult to record. You have to focus more on like what is gonna be funny years and years from now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think sometimes, right, you see someone that gets well known to the point, even when they're a great comic, where it's like, oh, they spent the last 6 months like writing a movie or starring in a movie, and then they're just not, I think sometimes it's just an issue of quality control, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, they could try to keep up this pace of a special every couple of years, but instead they're like, well, I have excuse me, I'm sorry,
Oh, no
I'm drinking
problem.
the seltzer, I'm so burpy. Instead of like keeping that 2 3 year pace, they're like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm giving it its due. I'm just not in that stand up groove. So even if they're like, oh, you see them around the city doing topical stuff or like
Mm-hmm.
building that new hour bit by bit, it's like it is really, I think once you've set a bar, I imagine once you've set a bar high with a special, you don't want to be like, oh, and I'll just pump out the next one in a year and a half, especially if you're not like a famous person where people are just going to watch and be delighted to like hear you talk for an hour. If you're like a comic that is not, it has fans but is not a celebrity, I think there is that pressure to really deliver every time, or people are going to be like, eh. They've
Yeah.
lost it.
Yeah, you don't get that grace period of they just like you. You have to like
Yeah.
bring the goods.
And in terms of writers' room stuff, I heard Brian Kiley say this. Do you know Brian Kiley? He's wrote for Conan for years and years.
Hmm.
He's like incredible joke writer, really really funny stand up.
Yeah.
And I heard him in an interview once say that like because he did topical jokes for Conan and his act before that, it might have been even a WTF. Even before Conan, he would do more topical stuff on stage. But then when he started writing topical jokes for TV, it just like that was for at the office, and then the non-topical, like the personal or conceptual stuff, was what he would do on stage. And so I kind of feel like that is a in some ways it's a gift, because like
Hmm.
I'm doing stuff that I think is like relevant to my life and not stuff that I could pitch to other people. And so it feels it by default is personal, and I don't have to like go, here's what's the news, here's why it is personal to me every time. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, totally. Because like the personal stuff I feel is better for stand up, whereas I feel like most topical or like Twitter, like
Mm-hmm.
people who dunk on current event stuff on Twitter, I feel like most of the time it's something that like everyone can think of.
Totally.
So
Or it's enough of a fleeting thing, or it's something that it right is kind of like on everybody's mind. So even though it's funny and cathartic to think about it and articulate it well and perform it well, it's like by the time your special comes out in, you finish the hour, you record it, it comes out 3 6 months a year after that. It's like, oh, I kind of remember that joke from like it was it was a meme, and it was in a late night monologue, and
yeah.
so I think it's hard to, and the people that really stand out doing topical stuff in stand up, it's like spectacular, because you're like,
Hmm.
oh shoot, like I mean, and there are so many more specials even, because I think about it. There are people who I'm like, oh, I'm really excited to hear what this person thinks about what's going on in the world when they do a new special.
Hmm.
And then there are people that I'm like, oh, this is a good joke, but it's not so singular that you needed to record it here and then release it a year later, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. And I like certain artists for like different things
Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
like I
Like I would
like
never be like Chris Rock, you shouldn't talk about current events because people are doing it on Twitter too much. You know what I mean? That's like I definitely think that there are people who are it's like, oh yeah, like because even thinking back to like Carlin, it wasn't like he was talking
yeah.
about every event in the news, but he was really a cultural critic in the way like Chris Rock can be a cultural critic. Like Roy Wood Jr., I think is like maybe the best person doing it at this point, of like
Hmm.
doing cultural commentary that stands up as a special, but is also really timely and incisive. And so like I really love seeing it done well, but I'm just not on that level where the stuff I'm going to write about the news is necessarily going to be so durable that it's worth like putting on video and being like, this is what I want people to see of mine uh years later, especially when I'm doing that kind of stuff during the day at a job.
Of course. And I wanted to ask you. So I knew you in New York, and I'll tell you I want to tell you my first impression of you when I saw you. I think probably at the Creek somewhere. That
I think that's my recollection of meeting you as well.
Yeah, I remember like in that upstairs theater, like saying, "Oh,
Hmm.
hi, Josh," and then seeing you go on stage. And as I would see you periodically, I remember having a couple thoughts. I was like, first off, I was like, I wish I was that guy's friend. He seems really cool.
That's really
I
kind.
like
Thank
that.
you.
And then my second thought was, oh, I thought I was the nicest comedian in New York City.
Get out of
And
here.
I'm gonna have
No,
to take
that's
this
too
guy down.
sweet.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's very nice.
Um,
I think, but I wonder if I'm gonna put this to you, because I do get a lot of credit for being nice, and I think I'm a pretty nice person. But like,
mhm.
there are also other nice comedians, people that are like very generous with their time and their money, people who are very supportive, do a lot of political work. I
Yeah.
feel like part of what it is like, as a dude, you get a little extra credit for being nice, where women are like kind of expected like, oh, this she should be nice, that's like how women are, just like
Yes.
societally.
Hmm.
Which is so that there's like that kind of built-in extra credit we get. um and also I think my act is very friendly, and so
Yeah.
that helps too, because I think there are people that are like you're like, oh, I'm surprised at how kind this person is, because they're like, they've got a real filthy act or something. But it's, I think people, I'm very similar on and off stage, I would say. And I think
I
that,
think so.
but it is played up. It's like, I'm extra, extra friendly on stage.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that is absolutely part of it. Like your general vibe on stage and off is very friendly, and I especially agree with you that as white dudes we get a lot
Yeah,
of
sure.
extra credits.
Yep.
Um, and I also think we get a higher threshold for what we can do before we're considered like an asshole,
Yeah,
if it makes sense.
totally. For
Whereas
sure.
whereas like if a woman just makes you feel bad, bitch. A lot. I don't think that, but a lot of
Or
guys I
like,
think that.
I would say a lot of women get flack for just being like politically outspoken in a way
Yes.
that, like, when a man does a similar thing, they're like, oh, that's a, or even more like, you might get, a man might get some blowback, right? But not nearly
Hmm.
the amount of like bullshit that falls on a woman for saying the same thing, and often less credit as well.
Oh, 100%. Like the number of very smart things that I've said that are just me repeating something my wife just said in front of the person that I'm repeating it to is staggering. Like anything like
Yes.
kind of smarter and sci-fi, I'm just probably repeating what she said a lot of times. So I definitely agree with you there. I also wanted to ask you, as like a comic who has this like kind of friendly persona on stage
Hmm.
and has this like very friendly vibe, does that make it difficult like to deal with hecklers when they come up?
I it No, I don't think so. It did at first,
Mm-hmm.
because I think when you're like an aggressive comic, even if you're not a good comic, you can you, like, if your attitude on stage is like fuck you the whole time,
Uh-huh.
then when someone is like, hey, what's up, you can just be like, hey, fuck you, and that like lines up. But
Yeah.
when you are, excuse me, a little more mild mannered on stage, you can't pivot right to like, hey man, fuck you, because people are like, whoa, we like, were you
Yeah.
just faking that you were friendly before? Especially if it's like they didn't hear the original heckle or whatever,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's usually not a guy being like, sir, you suck. It's usually just a drunk person being like, I don't know about that, and you just have to be like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to stop. And so I think as I gained um like a more thorough and evolving control of my own stage presence and comedic voice, I've figured out ways to gently redirect and gently shut stuff like that down. Um, but at first, it was more difficult because I feel like I lacked the built in advantage of people enjoying me already being like, this sucks, that sucks, you suck. And
Yeah.
so it took me finding that gear. But so I don't think, um, I think now I've caught up, if that makes sense.
Oh no, totally. Like you basically have to like kill him with kindness before you, and you're just basically pulling the bow and arrow backwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like, because I also think that it can be really effective, unless someone is truly like a vicious heckler, which is, I find, very rare, right? Like, most of the people
Yes.
shouting out are either like drunk and don't realize how loud they're talking, reacting to something in a sincere way, right? Like having a strong reaction that was maybe like 85% involuntary,
Mm-hmm.
that you have to then answer to. And so it's very rare that someone is like sitting there committing like first degree heckling. Like,
Yeah.
they've considered it, they want to do it, they're ready to do it, they say the thing that they've thought about, and they mean it, and they want to argue. Like, it's, so I think oftentimes it is helpful to the audience even to be like, hey man, I didn't hear what you're saying. And honestly, I would love for you to not repeat it. Like, you know what I mean? Just like
Sure.
a
Sure.
little gentle, just like, hey, I don't, it's like my turn to talk, and you have the entire rest of your life to make this sentiment heard.
Mm-hmm.
And like, just like a little needling, rather than just like, hey man, shut the fuck up, this is my show, to go from like 0 to 60 like that. I think, unless
Yeah.
that is already your vibe, it is a little jarring for audiences, because they want to hear you,
Mm-hmm.
your one specific person to them, and to like shift that energy really drastically, often, because, and also often, like I alluded to before, not everyone in the room heard the heckle that you heard.
Right.
right? Like especially if it's someone close to the stage and it's not super loud and aggressive, you're responding to a thing that most of the crowd is like dimly aware of or unaware of. And so like for you to come at them with a sledgehammer before you've kind of like, hey, I hear you talking, or like, hey, there's no need for this right now. You know, like before for you to like escalate to like as aggressive as you can get before the rest of the crowd even realizes there's a problem. Like you look so unstable and aggressive.
Oh no, no, absolutely. Like you have to like essentially the same way you have to get the crowd on your side when you're talking, you have to get the crowd on your
Yes.
side in how you're going to deal with a
Yes.
particular person.
Exactly.
And I know it's exactly what you're saying. That very like pointed, like I would almost call it like sniper heckling, is
Yeah.
very very rare. Lots of times it's just like you said, especially if you're dealing with like hot button issues, it could be an involuntary reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or even
For
like
sure.
the most vicious heckler I ever had to deal with. I wasn't even performing. It was when I was a doorman at the Laughing Devil.
Sure.
And
Oh yeah.
yeah, like
It's
it,
it's
it,
so even I was next up for a bad heckler situation, and it was just a person who's in the crowd at at an independent show.
Yep.
So there isn't like a real, I mean some clubs don't have this either, but there was no real like firm structure for like what to do with a heckler, right? Or like what rises to the occasion of problematic,
Right.
or what rises to the level like a problematic level of interaction. And so this person was like drunk and didn't want to be there, but seemed to feel very entitled to be there and give an opinion on the comedy that was being performed.
Mhm.
And like the comic was aggressive, verbally aggressive, like shut the fuck up, get out of here. And even that, most of the crowd I think was like, this audience member is making the show worse. And even this person's friends were like, I want to get this person to leave, and they are not being acquiescent to this.
Right.
And so like that's usually as bad as it gets, right? Like it's the worst is usually just like someone who's like entitled and a little mouthy about stuff. But it's that's, I think, even when you're very mean, I feel like that sometimes then they dig in harder and they're like, excuse me, all I did was ruin everyone's evening out and you called me an asshole. Now I'm going to go nuclear. And so like, especially when there's alcohol involved and they
Yeah.
can't see like, oh, I'm being disruptive to this bigger situation. It's not like we're having an argument. It's like there's a performance and I'm ruining it, but I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, they just like you just become like just tunnel vision to only your most
Yeah. Yep.
surroundings. It's pretty gnarly sometimes.
It's tough.
Yeah. I think you might be my third Emmy winning guest I've had on the
Ooh.
show. I wanted to ask you, was last week tonight your first writing job in New York, or did
It was my first full-time writing job. I did a
First
little
full-time.
what like is for I think legal purposes known as creative consulting on
Uh-huh.
one season of Billy on the Street, which was super part-time. It was like 2 days of work, all from home. I interviewed in the office, but then never went in to do the work. It was just like, hey, send us this freelance packet of suggestions.
Mhm.
And so I did that. And that was my first like TV writing job. And I'd been doing magazine writing and short humor pieces for magazines and websites and stuff already. But last week tonight was my first full-time TV writing job.
Gotcha. And I've read several of your articles and I've always found them very, very funny.
Thank you.
When it comes to getting recommended for writing jobs or
Mhm.
stuff like that in New York, how does that come about? Is that something like similar to stand up? Someone just sees you and thinks you would be good for this. Like, how did the Billy on the Street thing come about?
I think both that and last week tonight were things that like my manager was like, do you want to do this submission material for to write for these shows? And I did it, and I did in 20, so backing up just a little bit,
Mhm.
in late 2012 I had this kind of like massive viral Twitter success along with my friend Jacqueline Moore, and
Uh-huh.
she and I had this
Modern Seinfeld.
modern Seinfeld Twitter account that was like very of its time in terms of the like that something like that just being like, oh, here's plots to Seinfeld episodes if they happen today,
Mhm.
would be like so viral. And it got me the opportunity, like people, it got me the opportunity to start submitting to stuff. And part of it was a friend of mine who was a manager was like, oh, this gives me the the like, this is the feather in your cap that lets me go to my boss and be like, we should sign this guy as a client. He's like kind of blowing up right now. And
Uh-huh.
so she had already been kind of passing me opportunities, but this was the one where she was like, okay, I can like work with you full time now.
Uh-huh.
And so a lot of it comes from that, but I'd also had just like friends who worked at shows ask me to submit to stuff, and I think that happens with some frequency.
Hmm.
People, I know people who have gotten jobs, yeah, from like this person saw them on stage or read something they wrote and was like, would you submit for me, for this job opening I have because of that. Yeah, so it's all over the place, but like with late night, so much of it I think comes from like, you have to do the submission packet basically.
Yeah.
But getting those comes from either like knowing someone at the show or having representation most often.
Gotcha.
Those,
And you had this thing that kind of effectively built some heat for yourself, so that
yeah.
your manager was like, now we've got some momentum. Like, so that
I'm
was.
like I was an easier sell to places, I think, after that. Like it was like, oh, I mean, I think that there's, on one hand, it's like lazy when whoever just wants to work with you because you have like big metrics on social, right? Like a lot of
Mhm.
TikTok views or whatever.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, and I think doing things just by algorithm is like a big problem. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, I think using that kind of um, those numbers to be like, I've built something and it resonates with people, and these are the talents that I have as showcased by this portfolio on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter.
Yeah.
That it is like a nice calling card for people. But I think like when it gets problematic, or problematic, when it gets like uh tricky, is when someone goes, oh, this person has a million TikTok followers, we have to give them a TV show no matter what it is because they're so famous, or 10 million TikTok followers,
Hmm.
because people are so into them that like we will just build whatever it is around their virality.
Gotcha. Without any kind of thought about what will make this person look good.
What will
Uh,
make them look good, what they're good at. I mean, obviously when you're developing with somebody, you want it to be those things, but
mhm.
going first from like, geez, this person is so popular, they of course they will be good at this and deserve this, is like not always, hasn't always borne fruit. Sometimes it does, right? Like I think
Mhm.
there's so many people who've jumped from like doing characters on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and parlaying that into like acting work or writing work. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. That's kind of like, here, check out what I can do. This is what my voice is like. This is what where my talent is. Um, but I don't think that like every big number equates necessarily to like big talent. It's just that when you have a special talent, this can be one way to showcase it and build a following, and that, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't. It's not. It's kind of like a a two-way mirror, like a, glass you can see through on one side, and it's not. It doesn't always work both ways.
Oh no, absolutely. Like I think about that a lot. Like when I started this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, like what
Mm-hmm.
is like what am I good at? What am I interested at?
Yeah.
What will bring me joy? Like all those
Yeah.
kind of thoughts I started thinking about. So you start working for Last Week Tonight, and
Mm-hmm.
I know one of your other coworkers, former coworkers, Jeff,
Wait, was Chef Maurer Haggerty?
Jeff Maurer.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've known Jeff Maurer forever. Yeah, really funny, really great writer.
Yeah, I remember you both did, like, my first time I ever produced a show at a Creek. You both did the first one.
Oh, that's so funny.
I was
Jeez, wow.
tremendously appreciative of that, especially because my mother-in-law is like a huge fan. Was like a huge
Oh,
fan of Last Week Tonight. She was really
that's
excited
great.
to come out to that. So what's kind of like the what was the writing process like on Last Week Tonight? Love the format of the show, even if it
Yeah.
occasionally bums me out and leaves me feeling a little, what can I do? This is a big
Yeah,
problem.
they take on some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, so that's got to be a challenge. That's got to be a challenge as well, to tackle very sensitive issues, write jokes, not have the joke be about the person suffering, like the person who's
Yes.
in prison for life because of weed, and now weed's legal, or etc. Um,
Yes.
so what would the week look like at Last Week Tonight? Would you know the main topic at the beginning of the week?
Usually, when you didn't know it at the beginning of the week, you could tell on the show because it would be like 13, 17 minutes on something that happened that week. And usually it would not be. Usually it's like something that they could track for a few weeks and maybe pin it to or peg it to something that was like in the ether, but it wasn't always like, oh, this happened on Monday, so we work Wednesday through Sunday putting together this long piece. I think they liked the longer lead time, and that way you didn't have to on Wednesday go like, okay, shoot, what's gonna bear the weight of 15 minutes of comedy 2 days from now? Um, and so yeah, so the shorter stories, the beginning and sometimes the end, those would be developed often that week.
Mm-hmm.
The longer stories would you kind of start a few weeks out, and there would be like a
I
week of
see.
just like frothing the research and the footage teams, those producers like frothing up like and investigating, just poking around like, is there a story here? Is it new? Is there enough source material to tell it? um and I think that that's kind of the starting point. Then the writers, two writers or three writers, join and get familiar with the primary source, secondary source materials that are
Mm-hmm.
there, studies, video, etc. um and they start doing outlines. Like they meet with John and with Jim Carvel and these producers and do an outline. The outlines are kind of combined into one outline.
Uh-huh.
So you get a few days to outline. Those outlines are combined. You get a few days to do parallel drafts. Right, the writers write their own drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Then those get combined, and then it becomes a lot of like John and Tim looking at all the looking at the script, refining it, making sure it tells a story that is there and that they want to tell. And then at that point, like for the last few days, if not the whole last week, it's either like John and Tim working on it and asking for little edits and revisions, or just like, we need to beat the joke that was written here, or we added this fact, we added this video clip, we need a new joke for that. So like the last
Mm-hmm.
couple days, Saturday and Sunday are like pitching jokes all day in the writers' room on Saturday, and then Sunday doing that in the morning, rewrite in the afternoon before the taping. So it's like those stories can take 3 to 4 weeks or longer if there's the big production element that they want to
Yeah.
close it with.
Gotcha. Like if someone from FIFA says something stupid, then they need fire suddenly. Or
Yes, exactly. Or if it's like, if what we want to do is produce like a full scale, like what we want to do is, years ago, they had a long written correspondence with a mega church, like an evangelical mega
yep,
church.
I remember that.
And then in every correspondence, they would ask for more money. And so we would, it was like, here's this dollar, it's this seed money, now you have to send to us to seed this.
Yep.
And so like that written correspondence, then we had all their source material over months, and then kind of use that to narrate the story of like, this is how these churches function, to kind of give, to take money from people that might not always have it, or to ask for money at least for people that might not have it,
Yeah.
and give them these grand promises of what to do with it. And then we had the mega church in the studio, and it took a while to do that paperwork. Like I didn't have to do it, but it took a while for the paperwork to get done, that there was like the studio was now a church.
That is fascinating. Like
Yeah.
I just think of like, and I know there was that huge lawsuit about that one guy. I just imagine like the sort of the tap dance that has to occur to stay within the I guess not only legal boundaries, but then like the artistic boundaries as well.
Yeah.
That
And I think letting starting from the position of like, here's the artistic mission and the like intellectual comedic mission of this piece, and then how do we keep that within the realm of what the law allows? Like, how do we do the best version while being factual and intellectually honest, uh and legally not putting ourselves in danger, but keeping it funny despite all those like kind of nips and tucks and disclaimers and caveats.
right. Because and correct me if I'm wrong, like I guess and I guess when it comes to like writing for TV shows and stuff like that, you can't just outright say this person is a scam artist or this is a scam. Otherwise, you could be liable for slander, I would imagine.
I mean, it depends on like what is on the record already about them too. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can say this person perpetrated a scam if legally it has been uh, confirmed that that's what they do, you know? And so, like, on Desus and Mero, they'll
Yeah.
do a lot of like, man, this guy's always on drugs, right? And then often they'll be like, allegedly, just to kind of say like, oh, this is what
Mm-hmm.
we hear. But like, there was somebody that had like on the record pleaded guilty to, like, you know, someone like Bruno Mars, who had
Yeah.
like a cocaine possession that has been like legally confirmed. And say what you will about the justice system when it's you know, lack of fairness, I
Sure.
that is legally enough, I think, in some cases to not have to be like, oh, allegedly we've heard, because it's like, well, this has been legally confirmed for whatever that's worth.
Gotcha. Do you remember before we move over to Desus and Mero, do you remember
Sure.
something the joke you were most proudest of getting on Last Week Tonight?
I always liked really stupid stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, there's one that was my last season. I like, and I forget so many specific jokes, but there was one my last season of that it was about a dog. I think the piece is about astroturfing, right? Like fake grassroots movements.
Yep.
And there was like a dog that was like had a voice like almost you know, that anti-drug commercial that's like, don't smoke pot.
Yep. I
Mike
remember
Kaplan
that.
has the great joke about it.
Uh-huh.
But it was that kind of presentation, and the dog was really gruff, and I wrote a joke that ended with John doing an impression like, this why is this dog so, it was just like, hey, you can suck my dog dick. And I just like, to me, because John's voice has so much, I feel like his accent confers so much intellect and authority, and he speaks with so much
Mm-hmm.
integrity and sincerity and like rigor, that when you can get him to say, and when he will not get it, like, yeah, I'm gonna trick him, but like when he agrees to say something that's like just like dumb as shit, it's so funny to me. So that
Yeah.
was the kind of stuff that I was always like trying to sneak in, just like him doing goofy nonsense.
Oh my God, yeah, because he has that like super proper British accent,
Yeah.
and Americans, I think most things that come sound in a British accent are smart, unless it's that
Yep.
Cockney, like unless
Yes.
it's that accent.
Chimney sweep
Yeah. So to like,
stuff. Yeah.
oh no, totally. So to get him to like say something like super silly, or that whole like, I feel like during the pandemic there was that whole like hypersexualization of Adam Driver thing that they had going for a while.
Like that kind of stuff, which I had moved to, I'd left the show by then,
Mhm.
but that kind of stuff is really fun when he just like goes so hard into like real goofy, because he has the performance chops, and he's so funny that he
Mhm.
pulls it off but like when you use it sparingly, of him just being like a real weirdo, and because he has a real weird sense of humor,
Uh huh.
but I think he has like a real sense of when he wants to deploy that on the show, and like when that deflates the point of something he's doing, or when that kind of counterbalances it in a nice way. And I think he has like a real, you know, he's really judicious about that. But like when you sneak in just like dumb, gross nonsense, it's so fun.
Oh, absolutely. What is he like as a boss? I'm always curious about him because I feel like I could get along with him because he likes the football club Liverpool,
Yes,
and
he's a big Liverpool
and
fan.
and I like Liverpool also. So what is he the persona in the office on in the office?
No. He's like a very like low key dude in the office. He's not
Uh-huh.
like yelling and like you know, kind of constant righteous like lacerating jokes. He's like very low key, um really like a private guy,
Uh-huh.
but like very nice to work for, and a very nice guy, and like not like, you know, he doesn't come off, doesn't turn off the camera and go like, and now you, what are you doing here, you know? It's like very soft spoken outside of the performance.
Uh-huh. I figured that was just something I was curious about
Yeah.
as a longtime fan. So you were on that show for a number of years, and then you went over to be a head writer at
I so
Desus
I
and
sorry.
Mero.
I'm at Desus and Mero now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I jump in because I can't take credit for more than I have earned. I started off as a writer and producer at Desus
Uh-huh.
and Mero, and now I'm now the head writer and an executive producer.
That's very, very cool, and
Thank you.
I totally appreciate you correcting it. So to go from being a writer to being the head writer, that sounds like a major accomplishment to me. I'm curious, what is and this can be specific to this
Hmm.
show. Um, what is the kind of overall role of the head writer? Are you writing as much comedy or more than when you were a staff writer, or are you more of like an organizer and
More
arranger?
of a manager, editor. I give people notes on stuff. I like help sculpt the shape of things. I make, give assignments to writers and work with them on stuff. But and occasionally I'll write and produce stuff that is like my idea. I see it through from beginning to end. Um, but not not always. Like head writer, I think before I had worked in TV, I was like head writer. That's just the person who is like the top dog in the writer's room,
Uh huh.
does the most and the best writing. And I think sometimes you get there by just being you're like, oh, this person just obviously is the most on the ball and should be in charge. But it is also a managerial position. So like
Right.
not everyone who is a great writer is a great manager necessarily. And I think like it's the same in all kinds of media where or many kinds of media where like if you're
Mm-hmm.
a great writer, they're like, okay, now you need to edit this whole section of the magazine. It's like, well, that's a different skill to like
Yeah.
to even though writing is editing, it's like editing yourself is so much different than editing a bunch of other people. And
Mm-hmm.
thinking of assignments for them and working their voice. And so it's been a real interesting, and I had 3 years of work as like almost like a deputy to the head writer,
Mm-hmm.
giving notes on stuff and looking into things and making sure that everything looked right, all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. And now
Mm-hmm.
um, that's more on my shoulders, and I'm less like pitching and writing, and it's interesting. It's like really cool, and it's cool to see from both sides, like, oh, what makes a good piece, like what's required, and like what, having been a writer and still being a writer, what how do I manage to get the best work out of my team and like put them in the best positions to succeed, but also not like run them into the ground with workload.
Absolutely. It's the comedy equivalent of having applying all those real world job skills that are so
Mm-hmm.
useful.
Yes.
That's fascinating to me. It makes me think of like because I'm a big Anthony Bourdain person.
Mm-hmm.
You're almost like the chef, and then you're like leading the team of cooks, and then to I got man, that's got to be interesting. Like having working with your staff and being like, oh, this person is really great at this, so I'm going to try to get them to work on something that excels at what they're good at, like and just
Yeah.
managing that.
Putting people in positions to succeed, right? Like pairing them with responsibilities that they will excel at, and then also like knowing that, oh, they're doing this other thing that like this isn't the thing that they're the strongest at. How do I provide support for that so that this comes out the best it can and they look good and Desus and Mero look good and
Mm-hmm.
everything comes out well? Like how do I provide support for the staff so that they feel empowered to do like big exciting creative things and try stuff that is like big and new and fun without going like, okay, now I don't know how you got to do, like, I guess you had this idea, so like go do it, and
Uh
like
huh.
really work across departments. And we have such a collaborative office, which I think is really special. The writers work really closely with the team that produces in the field and the
Mm-hmm.
graphics department and the segment producers and research. And so it's like a very collaborative situation, and it's not a place where like the writers are uh, either like tyrannical, like I wrote this and you execute my vision, you peon.
Uh
Which I
huh.
think some places you can get a little bit like writers can get a little bit precious about their
Sure.
words, and it's also not like at Last Week Tonight the writers do more just like writing, and so you get less experience on set for stuff and like seeing what is required to produce because you're just like there's so much writing and editing going on,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a different style and a different kind of philosophy on like, and because the show is made so differently, it's just different needs from the writers or for the writers.
No, totally. If you're doing more like field based and sketch stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
it's more of like the form of like a traditional, maybe not a traditional late night talk show, but maybe close or adjacent to,
Mm-hmm.
compared to like a desk show where you're dealing more with graphics, and it would be more writing heavy
Mm-hmm.
because you're doing less field stuff. That's wild, man. Is there like a general bit of constructive advice that you could give someone who wants to write for TV? Is like a funny person or a funny writer and wants to write for TV?
Sure. I think um, have samples is really helpful. I think if you want to write scripted, if you want to write an hour long drama or a half hour comedy, or you want to create like a format show, have samples that show that that's the kind of work that you can do. Like people really like to hire when they have a script that they can look at, that like they know this form,
Mm-hmm.
they have their own voice, but it like I can see how it would integrate into our project. So that's like a very practical piece of advice, is just like have writing samples. And then the other one is is to just like do stuff that you're proud of that goes out into the world. So whether that's like having a big social media following that people know about, like so that you're a voice people are aware of cutting through the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's you're pitching stuff to places that have readership, right? And so
Yeah.
that like even if you're not a as well known yet, you can pitch stuff to places like I always recommend McSweeney's in the New Yorker, because they take open submissions for humor pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Or find something like Modern Love at the New York Times, where they have it's a recurring feature that you can submit your version of it to. So like you can kind of ride in the wake of this bigger publication, and people will see. So that helps people, it cultivates your voice, obviously,
Yeah.
right? Always be, not always, but be writing consistently and regularly, and challenge yourself. But then once you're like writing stuff that you're proud of, find a way for people to see it, so that they know that you're a person they want to work with. Because I think that just is
Right.
like making yourself a known, like I don't know, people talk about it as like building a brand, and I think that is kind of the cynical marketing way to say like
Yeah.
creating a, like cultivating your voice and then getting a reputation for having a strong voice.
No, that makes total sense. And when it comes to samples, are you saying like if someone wants to write for like a specific show, they should like write for ideas for that show or write spec
So for
scripts?
late night, it's a little different,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say original pilots are like what most people are looking for scripted, and for late night, the submission packets vary from show to show, but like writing monologue jokes is a way to like be prepared to submit for a show that has a monologue.
Yeah.
Writing, you know, desk bits, character pieces, sketches is like not everything will apply to every show, but if you're looking to do late night, like that kind of stuff is really helpful.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I appreciate your insight
No problem.
into this, Josh. Last thing I'll ask you, because
Please.
you're doing uh I, you're doing amazing work, and
Oh, thank you.
I really like seeing somebody who I think is a cool person do succeed and do great things. It's inspiring to me personally.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Abs-
That's kind of you.
Absolutely. So whether this is like TV or stand up, I sometimes like to ask this at the end of the show.
Please.
Is there something you haven't made yet that you want to create?
Gosh, great question. I mean, until last week, my answer would have been like, I'd really love to do an hour special that's video recorded,
Mm-hmm.
and that is like huge for me. It like really was exciting, and I think in the future, not like this year necessarily, but I would like to create a show that is, whether it's myself or with a collaborator, that is like,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, this is what we think should be a TV show. We want to sell it. And I mean, ideally, sell it, write it, get it on the air. But like
Totally.
that's to develop something from the ground up, because I really do. The last two shows, the last two full time jobs I've had, my first two essentially in TV, where I've been for the last 9 years almost. At
Mm-hmm.
Last Week Tonight, I was there from basically like month 2 of there being a staff at all in the office.
Yeah.
And then at Desus and Mero, I was there from the time they moved from one network to the other and kind of rebuild the show. So like it is cool to build something from the ground up, and I think the next step to
Hmm.
that for me is like creating something from like zero to like idea to now it exists.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And you think that would be like more like a comedy or sketch late night thing, or would that be a scripted
I
thing?
I don't know. I could go in a lot of different directions because I just like to write. I like jokes, and so like to me, the shows that have been really like the last few years that I've been like, oh, this is like the tone that I really like the most is like What We Do in the Shadows,
Love that
Veep,
show.
Black Monday on Showtime. The other two, I think, Our Flag Means Death. So like
Uh huh.
those shows that are like they're there's stuff that goes on, but it's just like so joke heavy and
Yeah, yeah.
fun. Is that's like what I really gravitate towards wanting to watch and wanting to. Bob's Burgers is another one, obviously that's been running
Hmm.
forever, but it's like I think sometimes when you get notes on stuff, they're like, "Where's the heart?" And it's like, where was the heart of like Seinfeld or Friends,
Hmm.
necessarily like it like the characters weren't all completely amoral, but like the center of it was like this kind of peek into a world
Yeah.
and like a filter, a funny filter through seeing, or several funny filters through seeing things.
Hmm.
And so like to me, like I rewatched Seinfeld during the pandemic and 30 Rock, and while both of them, have there are some jokes that legendarily have not aged super well,
Sure.
there's still so much that stands up because it's just like so fast and funny, and the characters are so vivid, and that's what I think I'm that's what I'm like really drawn to.
Oh no, I know exactly what you mean. And same way like I remember when Friends came on Netflix thinking there's going to be a lot, like I think you tweeted, I remember agreeing like there's going to be a lot of think pieces about how this show doesn't play to a modern
Yeah,
sensibility. But
yeah.
what I think is most resonant about that show, and I watched the reunion special, and
Hmm.
I have the WB studio tour booked for my trip to California later
Whoa,
this year.
cool.
What I think really resonates about that show, and what resonates to me about a few other things that I like, is it's really about like that group of friends and their experiences during this time in their lives. And I've always liked shows where somebody like has a group of friends or like gets a group of friends and like grows as a person or things
Yeah,
change. So
I
that's
think
what I've always kind of
that's really.
resonated with me.
I mean, I really like. I enjoy watching Grand Crew, which I think was NBC. We watched it on Hulu, but that was like Nicole Byers and that show, Carl Tart, just like really fun performances,
Hmm.
and it's just like really sweet, and it's not like it's there's not like a giant uh like journey that each character's on. It's like everybody is kind of on their own path of like gradual improvement and like figuring out what they need. And I think that is like it doesn't have to be a huge um concept that gets people in. If it can be, I think that's like What We Do in the Shadows is incredibly high concept, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
like my favorite thing on TV right now.
love it.
But but also the bigger that concept is, there's like season to season, it's like the episodes are very atomic, right? Like each episode,
Hmm.
you don't have to know a ton of what happened the week before, what happened the week after, and it's just like they're on these like weird silly adventures.
Oh yeah, and I agree with you. That's my favorite show right now as
It's so
well.
good. It's so
It's
fucking
really
good.
great. And
The There's just like so many bits, like it's so specific, even beyond like vampires, like it's so much more specific, where the bits of like Nandor the Relentless, who was a centuries old vampire, becoming an American citizen because he loves the 1992 Olympic Dream Team, is like it's like what a fucking like I watch it and I'm just like, oh, that's so
I,
good.
I know that's how I feel watching it, or What We Do, or Our Flag Meets Death. I'm like,
Yeah,
guy has a midlife crisis and becomes a pirate and
becomes a
is not
pirate.
good at it.
And then
Amazing.
even the specific episodes, right? Like I'm almost done with the first season of that, and
Hmm.
I think it really keeps gaining steam. But then the episodes are like, oh, it's almost like an Always Sunny level of like hijinks where it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
Steed takes Blackbeard on a like a treasure hunt that he just did because he wanted to like have a nice day out together. And it's like, what a great, like, I don't know, I just like love like jokes and hijinks and those little adventures. And I also don't have a talent for these big character journeys necessarily. Like, I really loved watching I love That For You, also on Showtime,
Uh-huh.
with Vanessa Bayer, which I thought was like full of really great performances, and it was like
Mm-hmm.
a really thoughtful arc. But I'm just like, I just want to write the jokes, or like I want to write the like weird, silly stories that are character
Mm-hmm.
consistent. But I don't like, my head doesn't work in like 10 episode arcs, and it's just like, here's a weird person and a dumb thing they can say.
Uh-huh. Well, then that's where like the collaborative
Mm-hmm.
effort can come in.
Totally.
So that like there's probably I'm sure there's somebody who has that idea or that thought, and then
Mm-hmm.
combine these two things. And
Yeah.
Captain Planet, this show is going to be my favorite thing, Josh.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Is there anything? I and you'll have to come back on the show and talk about it when it premieres. Is there what can we plug? Where can people? So your new special is called People Pleaser.
Yep.
Where can people get it? Where can they go to find it?
It is almost anywhere that you rent or buy VOD stuff. So it's like Apple TV, YouTube, Vimeo, Amazon. Internationally, I think Apple TV and Amazon have the most international reach, but it is country to country.
Mm-hmm.
So I know people have been like, "Where is it in Finland?" And I've looked. I have a list somewhere, but like, it's but it's any of the places, and sometimes people have very generously asked like, what's best for you where I watch it, and frankly, like, I'm just delighted people are watching it at all. So like, watch it however you watch it. If you like it, give it a shout out on to people you know or on social media. If you don't like it, that's a secret you can keep in your heart, you know.
Exactly. Well, Josh, this has been truly, truly delightful
It's
time
been wonderful. Thank you for taking the time.
getting to chat with you, man. And the special is great. And say it
Thank
gets
you.
and say if you pick up some international steam, if you get like a nice international fan base
Hmm.
going, I know a couple spots in Buenos Aires and a few other countries that do comedy, so we can make that
I'm
happen.
ready. Yeah, let's do it. Awesome.
Thanks for talking to me, Josh.
Thanks. Well, this is a blast.
All right, that is the incredibly delightful, incredibly funny Josh Gondelman. Thank you so much for doing the show, Josh. It was great to, after wanting to get this episode done for a number of years, it was great to finally get to sit down and chat with somebody whose work I really, really enjoy. If you enjoyed this, you will definitely love Josh's new comedy special, People Pleaser. There's a link in the description to help you find it on your streaming platform of choice. And of course, check out Desus and Mero on Showtime as well. And if you haven't, Josh's book that came out a few years ago, Nice Try, is available everywhere you get your books and audiobooks. So check that out as well. That is our show for today. If you enjoyed this and think you know a friend who would be interested in listening to this as well, you can send them to awesomedisaster.com. That's got links for the show on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. If you want to give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a follow on Spotify, that helps other people find the show on those platforms. And again, if you enjoyed this, tell a friend. You guys are my biggest supporters in terms of helping the show grow. So I truly appreciate that. And if you want to go and support the show a little bit further, there is a link to our merch store as well as our Patreon, which is patreon.com/awesomedisaster. You can check all of that out at awesomedisaster.com. And thank you guys again so much for being here. Continue to be excellent to each other and yourselves, and let's find a path forward and create the future that we want to as citizens of the United States of America. And I will see you folks next time between awesome and disaster. Stay safe, wear a mask, get vaxxed and boosted, stomp out fascism, and fight the good fight. Take care, everybody.